Today, once again, I thought I could share some thoughts about, the ways that we can make the Buddhist teachings our own, and then open things up for more of a conversation with any other questions or thoughts that people would like to share. Um, and one one of the one of the important pieces of advice given by the Buddha is about how to be a good student. Um, when it comes to the Dharma, I mean, a lot of this, at least some of this, would apply to any discipline, but some of this I think is especially relevant to the Dharma. And let me start with the thing that I think is very particular to the Dharma. And when I say the Dharma, I don't just mean necessarily the Buddha Dharma. I mean any Dharma. Dharma meaning that which is a method that holds us back from suffering, that saves us from suffering, right? So if there's a genuinely reliable Dharma, a true safe source of refuge, then the Buddha's advice is that we listen to it as personal advice, always as personal advice. So if you take the Buddha Dharma as your refuge, then, or even if not, even if you're just kind of taking it as a hypothesis for now, the idea is to not think about these teachings as abstract, as ideas, but as if they were specific answers to your specific questions about how can I suffer less, how can I be happy more, how can I be less, self-centered, how can I be more compassionate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So don't think about these as like, oh, this is what the Buddha said to somebody. This is what the Buddha is saying to me, right? Asterisk. I'll come back to the asterisk in 1 second. But one thing that I find, I don't think I'm the only one, is that sometimes when I hear some of these teachings, the thought that comes to me is like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what so-and-so needed to hear. I wish so-and-so were here and I wish so-and-so were listening, right? That's fine. That's normal. That's not something to be ashamed of or beat ourselves up for. And it's something to just kind of like go like, oh, mind you type of thing. And then just turn our attention back again to, this wasn't said for so-and-so. This was said for me. This was said to me, right? We can even, if we want, ask like, like, this seems to pertain so much to so-and-so and not so much to me. So like, why was the Buddha saying this to me? Like, why, like, what angle might I be missing? Like, how might this be relevant to me? Like, that can be a helpful thing to think. Now, I don't mean this in like some kind of like mystical sense of like the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha was speaking to you. He had you in mind. Maybe he did. But I just mean in the sense of, this is how we can benefit from this, as opposed to just collect it, as opposed to just collect it as more information. I'm reminded of something that happened once where I said something that I'm kind of like, oh, le mot juste. I'm glad I said that in that moment, right? So, but I, my job is, I'm a psychologist, and so sometimes I lead skills training groups for psychology clients. And one time I was teaching a certain skill for interpersonal effectiveness. And, this is how these are ways to say things that will make them more likely to be received by the other person, blah, blah, blah. And somebody in the group raised their hand and he said, let me give you a scenario. Suppose that there are two people and they start arguing and they start fighting. And the first person gets really upset and then they go into their room and they slam the door and lock it. And then the second person goes over to the door and they're banging on the door and they're saying, come out here, we need to finish talking. And the first person just isn't responding. They asked, which of these two people is the one that needs to be using skills in this situation? And I thought about it for a second. And I said, well, that depends 100% on one question. The question is, which one of these two people is you? Right? Because whichever one is you, that's the one that needs to be using the skills, because that's the only one who can, use the skills. And so it's in that sense, that it's good to listen to these as personal advice to you, right? Here's the asterisk, just to be really thorough and clear. Sometimes I think about this. Here's a brand new analogy here. Imagine that you're going to cross the street and you have a little kid and you're holding them by the hand and you're going to cross the street together with them, and it's a busy road. And the kid just lets go of your hand and runs straight into traffic. And it's like, look, I can do it on my own, right? Well, you're going to take that kid aside and you're going to say, well, you can't do that. The street is dangerous. You could get hurt, right? Now, suppose you're going to cross the street with a different kid, and this other kid, you're holding their hand and they just grab onto your leg and they're just clutching and they're saying, I don't want to cross the street. I'm afraid. I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get hurt. Well, that kid you're going to take aside and you're going to say, honey, don't worry. The street is safe. You're not going to get hurt. Right? Question, to which of the two kids are you lying? Right? Well, I would suggest that the answer is neither. Neither. You're telling them both the truth. It's just that you're telling them the side of the truth that they're missing. Like you're highlighting some aspect that they're not here, that they're missing, and you're telling them that, right? So to the kid who runs in front of traffic, it would be unwise to say, look, the street isn't dangerous, right? And to the kid who's terrified, it would be unwise to say, the street is very dangerous, you'll get hurt. It's just, right? Well, why am I saying all of this? The Buddha, when the Buddha was manifesting in our world, when the Buddha was teaching, the Buddha never wrote anything. Like, he never penned any books. And the Buddha didn't even kind of take the attitude of saying, like, come unto me and I shall tell ye, stand ye over there and I shall tell you. The Buddha didn't, that wasn't how the Buddha did it. The Buddha was just being the Buddha, and people would come up and ask him specific questions. And so he would look at each person and give each of them specific advice. And what happened was that his followers would listen very closely, and then they would kind of pass this on and eventually write this down. And so the sutras that we have and the tantras, the scriptures that we have, they're all things that were written down from the Buddha giving particular pieces of advice. And so this is where the asterisk that I mentioned before comes in. All of the teachings, we should listen to them as advice given specifically to us, but through this lens of having some clarity of, like, at the same time, like, what was the original audience of this? Like, it's good to know that, and the sutras will always say, at this time, in this place, this person came, and this was the circumstance, and this is the question they asked, and here's what the Buddha said. We don't want to gloss over that first part. We don't want to just read the answer. We need to understand the answer in relation to the question and who the person was, right? This goes, by the way, not just for the Buddha, but even for, like, quotes by the Dalai Lama and things like that. Just really anything that's kind of given as an answer to a question. And the reason that's important is because the Buddha sometimes gave what on the surface might seem like contradictory advice, very much like saying the street is dangerous, the street is safe, and so we don't want to, like, just take one blindly, the first one we come across blindly, and just say, okay, this is it. And so this is the advice that the Buddha gave to me, so this is what I need to do. We can just waste a lot of time that way and just make ourselves miserable, frankly. So it's important to understand the intention of the Buddha, which is something we can talk more about a little bit later. But with that proviso in place, still the advice that is given is this: we should look at ourselves as being somebody who's sick, somebody who's suffering with an illness that's very that we really don't want. The illness in question here is suffering and the potential for suffering. And we should look at the Buddha or whoever is the trusted person who's giving the advice as the doctors, the specialists that we're consulting. And we should look at the advice given as the advice given by the specialist. Like we should always, like anytime we go to a teaching, we hear a teaching, we read a teaching, that's the mindset to have if we feel confident in the source, you know. Maybe we could even say, even if we don't feel confident in the source, that's the perspective to have. It's just a question of like, okay, this is what this specialist is saying. Do I trust them? Right? Any thoughts or questions about that specifically? Okay. I don't know if Mary, are you looking for the mute button? Yeah. Okay. No. Are you waiting to ask a question, Mary?
Oh no, I was just looking to see if there was any raised hands.
Oh, I see. See, after 2 years on Zoom, like we start to kind of like think like, oh, I know sometimes people look like that when they're looking for where's the mute button. But anyway. Okay. So that's the part of the advice on being a wise student that's particular to learning Dharma. Now, I think the rest of the advice is helpful for learning anything. And that is about cultivating the qualities of a student, of a good student. And there's more that could be said about this too in the context of like being a student relative to a particular teacher and the importance of being discerning and being nonpartisan and things like that. But in terms of like listening to a particular teaching, they usually say that what we want to do is we want to avoid the 3 faults that a vessel can have, like a cup or a bowl or something like that a vessel can have, right? But the interesting thing is they always say 3 faults, but when you read the different teachings, they'll list different ones, right? So I'll tell you 4. It's the 3 faults, but I'll tell you what the 4 are, okay? They say that so let's just kind of say like a cup or like a glass, right? Just to keep it simple. So the purpose of it is to hold water. Well, there can be 3 problems that it could have, and here's the 4. The first is that it could be turned upside down. If it's turned upside down, you're not going to be able to pour water into it, right? And what that means, like what the analogy here is so the cup is our mind, the water is the teachings that we're trying to receive. Being turned upside down is just being completely unreceptive. It's just kind of coming at it with like, this isn't true, I'm not going to listen. I mean, of course, if we come at it from that perspective, no Dharma will enter us. It's just impossible. The second fault of a vessel is to have a leak, to have like a little hole on the bottom or something like that. Then if you pour water into it, the water will go in, but it will come out the other end, right? And this is basically being present at a teaching, but just kind of listening kind of inattentively, not trying to retain. I mean, we can only do so much to retain. We can only retain as much as we can, right? But so this is talking about like not trying, not making an effort. If we find that we forget things, like not even like bothering to write it down, if that would work for us. Again, if that wouldn't work for us, that's different, right? So it's in one ear, out the other, basically. So then we receive it, but off it goes, and it's not going to be very helpful to us going forward. Now, the third fault of the vessel, this is where there's 2 different versions that are given. So uh, in one version, they say is the cup could be dirty, right? And this basically means that you could be kind of coming at the teaching with already a set of assumptions that aren't what is meant in the teaching in the first place, right? So that would be kind of like if you were to go to listen to the Buddhist teaching on karma, but you came at it with the sense of like, but I already know from outside of Buddhism, I already know what karma means, so let me hear all of this through that lens, right? The opposite of this is what's called beginner's mind. I mean, I'm tying those two things together. It's not said like that but beginner's mind is the sense of like, if I'm going to hear something, let me hear it as if for the first time, like let me hear it anew. And then the fourth one, which is it's a variation, and they're very similar, but they're slightly different. It's very interesting. The fourth fault of a vessel, it could already be full of something else, right? If a glass is already full of something else, you're not going to be able to pour water in it, right? And so this is coming to a teaching feeling like, well, I already know this stuff, right? Or whether it's I already know this particular stuff, or I already know a different system, and I'm already kind of committed to that. And so I'm not like, it's almost like if the glass is dirty, it's almost like you're mixing something pure with something dirty. Whereas if the glass is full, it's like it's not even quite mixing it. It's like it's not coming in because like you're already committed to something else. Does that make sense? So what we want to do is we want to approach every teaching that we hear or that we see or that we read or anything else, any teaching we want to approach with a clean mind, with an empty mind, an open mind, we would say, I guess, with a mind kind of turned towards it, like kind of a receptive mind, and with attention so that it's not just leaking out. And the really cool thing is if we do that, and I really think this is true of any type of teaching of any kind, if we do that, we are going to learn so freaking much about whatever it is that's being taught. It's really remarkable. If you approach things this way, I can all but promise you that you can go to like the same teaching on the same topic 100 times and learn something every time. If you go to a teaching and you leave without having learned anything new, I would say chances are really, really, really good that one of the faults of the vessel was present. That's my experience, at least. Like when it's happened to me, that's usually been why, I think. And the interesting thing about Buddhists is that contrary to popular perception, Buddhists are extremely greedy. I think Buddhists are the greediest people in the world. It's just that the greed isn't turned to material things, which we realize just don't do anything. The greed is turned towards like maximal benefit. Like we're always trying to maximize the benefit we get out of anything, you know? And so if you're going to go to a teaching, it's like, how can I get every last bit of juice out of this thing? It's greedy, you know? From a Buddhist point of view, the problem with like saying my life's ambition is to have a car that's like this and that the neighbors will envy and the house that blah, 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 blah. The problem with that isn't that there's anything bad. It's just that it's so not enough. It's like, come on, you can do better than that, you know? That's being Buddhist is about being maximally greedy, I think. Um, it's Passover right now also. So Passover, I don't know if you might be familiar. We sing a song called Dayenu, which means like that's enough for us. Like if this happened but that didn't happen, that would be good enough. If that happened but the other thing that happened, that would be good for. Buddhism is the opposite. Buddhism is, it's so funny because I think people have the opposite perception generally. Buddhism is like, okay, that's fine, but is there any more? And it's only when we get to, how about like perfect and complete enlightenment and omniscience and infinite bliss without end for everybody everywhere. It's like, okay, fine. I'll take it. I'll move on in just a moment. But like, this is actually, if you read the life story of Shakyamuni Buddha, that's actually there in the story, right? The Buddha went to like this great teacher who was reputed to have like gone farther spiritually than anybody else, and he achieved the same level. And he said, "Okay, so what's next?" And it's just like, there's nothing next. It's like, and so like the teacher finally said, you know what? Okay, fine. There's this other guy who they say has gotten even farther. Okay, so go to him. So the Buddha went to him. He wasn't the Buddha yet. He went to him and he got to that point. He's like, all right, great. What's next? And she's like, what are there is no next. Like, what are you talking? And so he was so upset that he left, you know, and it's because he did that he kept going and going, going until he became the Buddha, you know. And I think the only reason that when you achieve Buddhahood, the question what's next doesn't make sense is because it's conceivably, you know, all there can, it's like it's like everything, like what's more than everything, like it's just at that point the question ceases to make sense. But I digress. Any thoughts, comments, concerns, objections, insights at this point? Any other, like, even if it's not about specifically what I was sharing just now, I could talk about other thoughts on making the Buddhist teaching. Yes.
So I love your little thing about greed and Buddhists. It's very nice. And just in the last day or two, I was thinking about actually the Buddhists are incredibly arrogant also, because everything that most people think is of value, we discount. It's just like, why are you thinking that garbage? It's just a waste of your time. It just sharing.
Thank you for that. Yes, I totally hear you. I totally hear you. Yeah, I think it's a matter of like accepting the reality of our direct experience, isn't it? It's if there were no prospect that things could be even better than this, then I think it would just be like a Debbie Downer type of thing to say like, is that all there is? You know, that's why, you know, I think if you're not convinced of the third noble truth and the fourth noble truth, then better not to spend too much time thinking about the first noble truth. You know, like if you're not convinced that there's a possible end to suffering and a path to the end of suffering, then probably best not to just spend all of the time thinking about how much suffering there is, you know. The cool thing about Buddhism, I think, is that because by investigating, we see a path out, then we almost have like the freedom to say like, oh, come to think of it, you know, it's like if like in a very poor country, like people's life dreams might extend to like, just if I just had my own house, that's all I want, you know. If I just had, you know, and mind you, I'm not saying that's a small thing for any of us here either, but I think here we want so much more in the West, I mean, right? Because we see, let me try to see if I can put it another way. It's hard. I'm having a hard time putting this into words, but like sometimes when I've been in like poorer communities, like there's something almost touching about the simplicity of the aspirations, you know, relative to my privileged position. It's like the dreams extend to something that, to me, because I have so much privilege, it feels so small. It feels like, oh my gosh, I already have that and I'm not happy, like, if, oh my God, if only I had a car, my life would be perfect. And I have a car and my life is not perfect, and in that context, right? In that context, like, to say to somebody who can't afford a car, to just say to them like, oh no, a car wouldn't make your life perfect, that's just kind of unfeeling and thoughtless, because imagine saying to somebody like, no, a car isn't enough. Like, really, if you're married, like, you need two cars. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, I can't even afford one car. Like, what? Like, just what, But if you're in a place where you can afford two cars, then you might say like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine living with just one car. Right? First world problems, right? In a similar way, in a weirdly similar way, if we live in a mindset of like, the best I can hope for is to only get angry a few times a day, right? Then if somebody says like, oh, what are you talking about? Just never get angry at all. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? But if we live from a perspective where we recognize our Buddha nature, our Buddha potential, then the thought of being angry every day just seems like, why on earth would I ever want to settle for that? I said that so uneloquently, but I think the point perhaps is made. Any other thoughts at this point or questions? If not, then the next topic that I was thinking to talk about a little bit is the question of how to discern the truth. That's why I kept asking for questions. I was hoping you guys would save me, right? But here we go. I'm going to have to do this, right? How to discern the truth. How to discern the truth. So there are different ways of getting at the truth. There are different approaches. There's the scientific method, for example. And in Buddhism, the method that's used is remarkably similar to the scientific method in some respects. It's also, what is it that sometimes one aspect of the scientific method is that it's hypothetical deductive. It's a hypothetical deductive method. And something similar is true of the Buddhist method of getting at the truth too. So the idea in Buddhism is, let me just kind of dive into it and say it this way. In Buddhism, if we want to develop wisdom, if we want to develop like a final stable wisdom, they talk about it from the point of view of us is developing three wisdoms successively, chronologically, one after the other. The first wisdom that we need to develop, I'll tell you what they're traditionally called, and then I'll tell you what they actually mean. Traditionally, they're called the wisdom of listening, the wisdom of, there's different terms for this one, but the wisdom of analyzing, and the wisdom of meditation. These are fairly lousy names as they go, like, because they don't quite get at what we're really saying. I think it would be a lot clearer as a starting point if we refer to them as the first one, the wisdom of learning. The second one, the wisdom of investigation. And the third one, I'll give you three options, either the wisdom of accustomation, or the wisdom of habituation, or the wisdom of familiarization. And the idea is this: we could, in theory, try to figure everything out for ourselves. Like we could, in theory, start from just wherever we are and not talk to anybody else or read anything else and just try to figure out, like, okay, how do I become omniscient? or can I? And how do I become enlightened? How do I become more compassionate? How, like, I can try to figure all of that out for myself. And there's nothing wrong with that innately. It's just that I only have there's so much to figure out, and I only have so much time, so I'll just frankly like die before I get too far. It's kind of like if I had never heard arithmetic and I said, but I don't want anybody to tell me, I want to figure this out on my own, and I want to get to calculus on my own, I'll die before I get to. No one person in the history of humanity could ever have deduced calculus from nothing. Everybody just added, like, they learned what was already there and they added a little piece, and then the next person learned this and added like. So for that reason, if we want to and then again, from a Buddhist point of view, if we die before we make much headway, we have to kind of start all over again in the next life. So we'll kind of go around and around and around and not really get anywhere. So from that perspective, if we want to get somewhere, we need to make as much progress as we can in the time we have in each lifetime so that we can make it cumulative. And so to do that, we need to be taught something by someone at some point, right? And by the way, this was true for Shakyamuni Buddha too. It's not like Shakyamuni Buddha was an exception and he just kind of deduced it all on his own. That's not true at all. Shakyamuni Buddha, from a Buddhist point of view, for countless past lives, he was doing what we're doing and just learning, from those who had already figured it out. There's no first Buddha. There couldn't be. It would be it would just be impossible. There couldn't be. So, but then again, the question becomes, well, that's the whole kind of point of what we've been talking about the last few weeks, but aren't we told that we can't just go by what somebody else is saying? And the answer is yes. So what we're supposed to do from a Buddhist point of view is we're supposed to go to somebody who seems to us like they get it, like we have some reason. We can there are lots of ways to kind of assess that Buddhism talks about, but let's just say for now, like somebody that we have some educated reason to think, like, it seems like this person gets it. And then hear what they're saying and take that as hypotheses. That's the idea. We're not believing it. We're not saying, oh, Buddha says this, therefore it's true. We're saying, oh, Buddha says this, therefore let me go test it out. Let me go investigate it. And then I'll find out for myself whether it's true or not. That's crucial. That's crucial. It's remarkably similar to the scientific method. It's a little bit more stringent. It's a little bit more strict than the scientific method, because in this scientific method, and I'm not criticizing science. You're never going to hear me criticize science. I have hypothyroidism. If it were not for science, I would be dead. But thanks to science, I just take a thyroid supplement and I'm alive. So I am not opening my mouth to criticize science. But interestingly, science is a little bit less strict, because in science, it's enough for an experiment to be duplicated in general, for something to be considered acceptable. Whereas in Buddhism, everything needs to be eventually duplicated by ourselves. So scientists necessarily, they believe lots of things based on having read, like experiments where the finding was found again by other people, but no scientist could ever do every experiment, right? As Buddhists, we're supposed to take all of the hypotheses that the Buddha is saying, and we have to experiment on all of them ourselves before we can say, I know this. It takes a while, right? It takes a while, but it's worth it. Again, ambition. Like we could say, I once heard a geshe. I completely forget what the context was, but a geshe was giving a teaching. And I remember at one point he said, blah, 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 a ham and cheese sandwich. It's not nirvana, but it's something. And that I don't know, that just sticks with me. It's like a ham and cheese sandwich. It's not nirvana, but it's something, right? So it's a lot easier to say like, testing every hypothesis that the Buddha ever provided it sounds like so much work. It's so much easier to just make a sandwich. I'll just do that instead, right? It's true, but you'll get a lot more out of omniscience than you'll get out of a sandwich. So here's how it goes. So three wisdoms. These are three things that you have to, there's a process that you can achieve each of them. So the first one is the wisdom of learning. And what this means is, you know, so you need to work at it. You need to attend teachings, listen, read, whatever, ask questions, have questions answered until you attain this. And you'll know, like, attaining this means that you've grasped just what it is that the teaching is saying, clearly, correctly, decisively, right? You don't know that it's true, but you know what the claim is. And you'd be surprised how often we go wrong on that one. We try to move on to the next one before we've gotten that one right. So for example, a lot of people might go around trying to prove or disprove or establish or refute Darwin's position that we are descended from monkeys. Well, the fundamental flaw in that is that Darwin did not say we are descended from monkeys. That is not correct. Darwin said that humans and monkeys are descended from a common ancestor, which is different, right? Perhaps the difference might not matter to a lot of people in terms of their feelings about it. That's fine. But at least, like, if we're going to debate this or try to understand this or try to prove this, we need to at least be trying to prove the right thing. You know, of course, we can also set up a new hypothesis of our own and say, like, all right, maybe humans did descend from, and it's not what Darwin said, but maybe they did. And we can try to establish that too, no problem. But the methods that Darwin provided for establishing his thesis will only work for establishing his thesis. They won't work for establishing another thesis. That's up to us if we want to do that, right? Do you get what I'm saying so far? Yeah. So in a similar way, the Buddha did not say that everything is suffering. If you go around trying to prove that everything is suffering, you won't be able to, because that's not true. And the Buddha didn't say it. The Buddha said that all contaminated phenomena are suffering, which then, you know, necessitates the question, well, what did the Buddha mean by contaminated phenomena? So then you have to find out that, and so on. And then you can set out to establish, is that true or not, right? And again, this isn't like a dogmatic thing. We're not saying like, and you must not ask whether everything is suffering, and you must believe that it's not. Of course not. Of course not. If that's something that you're curious about, by all means, ask the question and try to find out the answer. But two things. One is, don't expect that the Buddha's arguments will prove that, because that's not what the Buddha is saying. And also, number two, if you find that that's not true, don't say, see, the Buddha was wrong, because that's not what the Buddha ever said, right? So to be able to test a hypothesis, first we need to understand the hypothesis correctly. When we understand the hypothesis correctly, then we have the wisdom of learning, also traditionally known as the wisdom of listening. And the reason it was called, and listening is a fair translation, to be honest, because back in the day when this was first named, the only way of learning basically was listening. You know, they didn't have too much in the way of audio-visual media. But now, I mean, the principle, it absolutely encompasses reading articles and books and watching videos and all of that. It's basically getting somebody else's hypothesis clear in our mind. When we have that, we have the wisdom of learning. So the wisdom, when we have the wisdom of learning, it will prompt us on what to analyze and why, and it will suggest some ways on how to analyze it, right? So basically, like the Buddha said, that it's important to understand the nature of suffering for these reasons, okay? And the Buddha said that the nature of suffering is this, and the Buddha said that we can figure out that the nature of suffering is this by going about it this way. Then we can test and see if that's true. Then the second wisdom is the wisdom of investigation. And the wisdom of investigation is doing the work once we've understood the hypothesis. We take the hypothesis and we then go about testing it, and we go about figuring out how it works. Now, how do we do that? There's lots of methods that that are taught in Buddhism. However, the real answer as to how we do this is in any way that it validly works, and in any way, and do whatever it takes. You know, make sure that your method is reliable. And again, Buddhism gives us lots of advice on how to do that. But do whatever it takes. Do experiments, like physical experiments, thought experiments, use logic, check your logic, use math, like just everything. Like nothing is off limits, you know? What you want to end up with is like an irrefutable, clear understanding that the hypothesis is true if it is, or an irrefutable, clear understanding that the hypothesis is false if it is. And again, if the Buddha gave a hypothesis and the hypothesis is false, please, for the love of Buddha, tell us. Because a lot of us are wasting a lot of time if that's so. So we can talk more about methods for investigating, because it can seem a little daunting at first to just be told, like, there are future lives, go investigate. Like, you know, like what, like how, right? Well, so you've attained the wisdom of investigation when you have a complete, clear, calm conviction based on flawless investigation that a certain position is so, right? It's not a presumption. It's not like you're squeezing yourself into thinking it. It's not like you're like, oh, I need to believe this because I want to be Buddhist, or I want this to be true, or nothing like that. It's just, you have this like clarity. It's like, oh my gosh, of course, you know? Was it, I'm sorry, I was actually talking about something similar with another group this week. Like, was it here last week that we talked a bit about when I was teaching square root of x squared? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's like that, you know, like if you learn what the premise is in the first wisdom, and then you investigate, and eventually you'll come to a place where, like, well, I mean, yeah, of course, the square root of 64 squared is 64. Like, it's yours. It's clear to you why. It's not, you know. Anyway, so then you have the wisdom of investigation. Well, now what you need is this. So what you've arrived at this point is like a clear intellectual certainty about some fact about the world, right? But very, very likely, I mean, it might be or it might not be in other contexts, but if it's something that's coming from the Buddhist teaching, then it's almost certain that that will go completely against your old way of thinking. The Buddha basically only the Buddha basically only taught things that go completely against our common ways of thinking, right? And so old habits die very hard. And so you'll still be behaving as if the old thing were true and feeling emotionally as if the old thing were true, right? So for example, I'm trying to think of one that isn't kind of like pulling towards like what might be perceived as sadness. Well, so for example, you could have like a clear intellectual certainty that you have the potential to become enlightened and omniscient and omnibenevolent. Intellectually, you might know that, and yet you're still living your life as if, like, who am I? In low self-esteem and all of that, right? That's easy to contemplate, I'm afraid, right? So now the work is to change your mind so that your mind, it lives and breathes in accordance with what you intellectually know to be true, so that it experiences the world as if what you know intellectually to be true were true, which it is, right? And so the way we do this is by accustoming our mind to this insight, habituating our mind to this insight, familiarizing our mind with this insight. And there's a Tibetan word, gom, and the Tibetan word gom, it means accustomation, habituation, familiarization. But alas for us, the Jesuits, when they were working on converting the Buddhists, they took that word and they translated it into English as meditation. They meant well. They really meant well. But what this is what we're doing with accustomation is, and we don't have to be sitting, we don't have to have our eyes closed, we could be doing anything. What we're doing with accustomation is we are giving rise to what we intellectually know to be true until we feel it in our gut. And then we're letting our mind rest in that feeling until that feeling dissipates. And then we're giving rise to it again and letting our mind rest in that feeling until that feeling dissipates. And then we're giving rise to it again and letting our mind rest in it until it dissipates, right? So it's like we might all intellectually know that one day we're going to die, but most of the time it doesn't feel that way. Most of the time it doesn't feel that way. But if you sit down and you think about it very carefully, methodically, logically, you will, at a certain point, kind of feel this visceral sense of your mortality, of the reality of your mortality, right? And so if you want to realize, to have a realization, as we say, of the certainty of death, what you need to do is do that, like until you have that visceral sense of your mortality, and then let your mind rest in that sense, right? Let your mind, quote unquote, become one with that sense until you kind of lose the sense and it becomes just intellectual again. Then you give rise to that sense again and let your mind rest in that sense until it goes away, etc., etc., etc. You're training. And if you do that enough, eventually your mind will rest and it won't go away. And then you'll live every moment with that sense of your mortality, which if we don't have it yet, might sound horrifying, right? but it's actually not. It's actually extremely invigorating, and every moment becomes precious and joyful, and no time is wasted. But that's just in particular with that one. But it becomes part of our reality. It's never something that it's not that we're always thinking of it. It's not that we're always thinking of it, but it's that it's, it's as obvious an unexamined assumption for us from then on as gravity is. Like I say, like we don't forget. We don't say like, oh, the light bulb is out. Let me just float to the ceiling. Oh, that's right, gravity, I forgot. We're not thinking gravity, remember, gravity, have to remember gravity. We're not thinking it, but we live according to it all the time. And so if we have a realization of something, we live according to it all the time. And that's the way to get one. So where does sitting down with our eyes closed or open or whatever and our legs crossed, where does that come in? All that is one method of familiarization. All that is one method of habituation. That's all. It's a very, very, very powerful method. It's a way to do it in a very concentrated way, literally, right? It's a little bit like exercise, which includes just walking around the house, that's exercise, versus something like CrossFit, I guess. I've never tried it, but it's very intense. Like, it's like, we're going to really exercise for 20 minutes or whatever the case may be, right? It's like that. So if you don't sit down with your legs crossed and become and habituate to certain insights, you can still get places. It will be slow, but you can still get places if you're habituating yourself in other ways. If you're constantly, like if you go through your day mindful of something you've been investigating and that you've come to like the wisdom of investigation about, right? So let's say I've come to the wisdom of investigation about my mortality. If I go through my day just noticing all of the ways that I could die, again, it sounds morbid, but I promise you it's not in the context, okay? In the context. So if I go through thinking about like, oh, look, how easily I could have died with that. Oh, look, oh my God, look, so-and-so just died. And so-and-so is just like, if I'm always thinking about that, I will be habituating myself more and more and more and more to that, and I will get somewhere with it, right? On the other hand, if I just sit down with my eyes closed and habituate myself in that way, but then as soon as I open my eyes and get up, it's gone from my mind, I won't get nearly as far, I don't think, right? If I do both, then I'll have realizations. If I put in the other ingredients too, of course. So so that's a technique. That's the Buddha's recommendation. Like if you want to achieve a realization, the best way to do it, the only way that's kind of like guaranteed, I think I would say, is if you both systematically sit down for concentrated periods of habituation and continue to practice habituating during other times as well. Let me just see something here. So let me just say this before I open it up to questions or thoughts. Remember once again that the whole point of Buddhism is to change our mental structures, right? So in such a fundamental way that our minds stop being suffering creating machines, hatred, greed, delusion making machines, and instead become bliss creating machines, compassion, peace, wisdom making machines, right? That's what we're trying to do. And to do that, we need to have these realizations, right? We need to have these experiences. Not experiences sound so fleeting. Like we need to have these sea changes such that we're seeing the world according to the way it really is, according to the way we've established it to really be, You know, we're not seeing the world as if we were immortal. We're seeing the world as if we were mortal. For example, I just use that example because I think it's very easy to grasp, right? And so, but how to do that? That actually requires four things, and this is something that I think this is kind of new that I'm introducing now. But it requires four things. The first thing is it requires us going through that process of accumulating wisdom, right? That I just described. So the first of the four things is we need to first find a hypothesis and then develop the wisdom of learning. Then we need to work our butts off and develop the wisdom of investigation. And then we need to really practice accustoming ourselves with it, familiarizing ourselves with it, and develop the wisdom of habituation, right? But that's only one of the four ingredients that we need. What are the other three? The other three are, we need to undo or get rid of all of the kind of like unrelated stuff in our mind that's holding us back from our mind being able to change, right? I'm not just talking about like opposite opinions or opposite beliefs. I'm talking about almost like a stickiness of the mind. It's kind of like making it hard for us to take steps forward, you know, that's making it kind of like we're slogging through quicksand or something like that, right? We need to get rid of that. And that, the traditional translation for that, the traditional term is purifying obstacles or purifying negativities or something like that. So that's the first of the other three ingredients. So that's the second ingredient, let's say, right? We need to purify obstacles or negativities. Then the third thing we need is we need to build up, like it's almost the opposite. It's like we need to build up the forward momentum. We need to build up like the energy that's going to propel us forward towards our minds being able to change. So it's almost like purifying, it's like clearing away the path. And this next one that I'm saying is like making sure that we're filling up the gas tank, right? And the way that this is often translated is accumulating positive potential. Accumulating positive potential is like we need to kind of create the potential for good things to come, for change to happen in the mind. The Jesuits translated it as accumulating merit. And we have inherited that translation. So you will see it referred to a lot as accumulating merit. Accumulating merit makes it sound like something like in the Girl Scouts, I think, or like we need to collect a certain number of proofs of purchase before we can trade it in for a prize. And that's not in the least little bit what we're talking about here. And merit also has a very judgmental connotation, which is also not at all what we're talking about here. We're just talking about something very like mechanical of the mind. You know, it's between you and yours. It's all happening within your own mind. Nobody else is paying attention. Let's say, like nobody else cares. Let's say, you know. So that's accumulating positive potential. And then the fourth thing we need, it's so crucial too, and it's so, I think, overlooked. And to be perfectly frank, it's the one that I find hardest to put into words. But we need to have some connection with somebody that moves our mind in terms of inspiration. We need to have inspiration is really what it is, but inspiration doesn't quite cover it. We need someone who almost like serves as a bridge, like a conceptual bridge for us between where we are now and where we want to go. We see somebody who's like already on the way, and that we can relate to them. It's like they're similar enough to us that we can see ourselves in them, but they're similar enough to where we're trying to get that we can see how they might get there. right? And so that what like one of the things that does is it makes it suddenly feel possible in 2022 in the United States or wherever for us to become enlightened. Otherwise, it's a very dry thing from ancient texts, you know? Otherwise, it's a very dry thing from ancient texts. No matter how much we might intellectually believe it, like even in some extreme, we might say like, well, you know, I believe enlightenment is possible in theory, but not here and now with everything that's going on, right? We need something that brings us this experiential clarity and certainty almost that, oh my God, I can do this, right? And that's going to be in the form of an inspiring person. And so that's what that's really saying, okay? But I'll tell you how you'll see this translated. And I hope you'll laugh. Because it's so freaking misleading. Again, the Jesuits meant well. But the translation that we've inherited is you need to pray for blessings. I hope that sounds nothing like what I just said, right? Because it's those words don't mean that, right? If you think we need to pray for bless, like I don't know what you imagine, but you imagine something else, I think. Alex Berzin says the same thing as we need to request inspiration. Even there, you know, like I think it's warmer, right? But there's what it's actually getting at is when we have somebody like that we've made a connection with, like it has to be like a real living, breathing person, even if we don't see them in person, but they need to be alive in the world today so that we can feel that, like so that it can serve that function, right? Once we've made a connection with somebody like that, then we really, what this fourth piece is getting at is we need to open up our mind to be inspired. And the way we do that, like a mechanical way, like how do you say, you know, if you say to somebody like open your mind, you know, it's like which muscle do I squeeze, you know? So the way that we do that is in our mind, we imagine ourselves asking that person, requesting that person, please inspire me. That opens our mind for inspiration. It's not that we're imagining asking that person, please inspire me, because, oh, now they're from their side, they're gonna, here's your inspiration, you know? Or if I don't ask, then they're not gonna, or, you know, or anything like that. We're using that word, like imagining ourselves asking, please, please, please inspire me to be like you, because that act of asking opens up our mind so that we can be inspired. The person need never know, in theory. It's a very interesting technology is what it is. And what's interesting is this. Again, even here I'm saying like, this is the method for accomplishing realizations. Well, that's also for you to take as a hypothesis if you care to, and find out for yourself, you know? But suffice it to say that these aren't things that we're kind of like, they're not theory-based, they're evidence-based, you know? As we would say in Western psychology, at least, like, it's not like, well, I guess we need to blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think when you think about it, I think, for me at least, I think it makes sense on the face of it. But if you try it out for yourself, in the right way, like in the right way, I think you'll find it too. And again, if you don't, tell us. But something opens up when you incorporate all of these pieces that doesn't open up when one of these pieces is missing. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Very interesting. That's why they say, you know, that you need to become enlightened, you need to have a teacher, or again, a guru or a lama, like, you know, there's again, different translations. But the reason you need a teacher is not because you need them to teach you the things, ironically enough, that you can get from books. What you need a living person for is that inspiration piece. And if you don't have that, you can still get places. You can still get places. Don't get me wrong. But once you have that and it's kind of like healthy and safe and working well, then it's like everything opens up and things just start to happen. Your mind just starts to change. Again, even if the person doesn't know, right? But since I said that, I want to add two things. One is, don't let that give you any sense of rush to find somebody that you feel that way about. It has to happen organically, you know? Don't try to push it. Don't try to rush it. And two, if you want to incorporate that last piece into your personal life, into your practice, it's a very private thing, by the way. So you don't, it's, it's not something that you need to compare notes on with anybody else. But if you do want that, it's important to really learn the teachings about that and how to do that safely. Because the only reason for that to work is for us to kind of make a commitment with ourselves, sign a contract with ourselves that, henceforth, no matter what, I'm going to see this person as a source of inspiration. Even if they suddenly surprise me by doing untoward things, like, I will not look at that. I will look at their Buddha nature and I will be inspired by that. And you can notice, if you're paying any level of attention, that what I just said is extremely dangerous, right? It's extremely dangerous, because if you do it the wrong way, you will be condoning bad things potentially. You will be putting yourself in harm's way potentially, and so on and so forth like that. But there is a safe way to do it that doesn't fall into any of those traps, but it's important to be very clear on that before you do. I probably said way more than was called for in terms of that, but now, are there any thoughts, questions, concerns? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. I just want to, so many thoughts, trying to put them in words. First off, I was like the wrong container at first because I kept ignoring your classes. And then I watched them on YouTube and I was like, you were talking about the general anxiety and how, like, contrary to what you were just thinking, I am one that thinks I'm going to die any minute now. And like, they called me back into work and I'm going back into work and everybody's like, oh, isn't this great? And I'm like, this is not great. Like, there should be so much more, like there's that greedy part too. Like, I'm like, why am I going into, the heart of the city and traffic, pollution, blah, blah, blah. Like, there should be so much more. And just, I'm trying to use all of my tools and I'm trying to, like, okay, this is just the mind playing tricks on me. This is just, like, rely on the Buddha, take refuge, and nothing's working. So I'm like, okay, Buddha's wrong. Like, I got to tell the world Buddha's wrong. And I'm like, okay, no, like, calm down. Like, I'm using a faulty tool to judge something else. And so I'm like, calm down. Like, definitely, I did sign this contract with me that I am a Buddhist, right? So, I've taken the vows and stuff and I'm like, okay, so go back to this. And so I click on the YouTubes and I watched your video where it's talking about the general anxiety and how, like, you said that the people will think that the chair is going to fall apart any moment now. And yes, I'm like, oh my God, that's so it. Like, why did that make it so much more powerful to label it and think that, oh my God, okay, so it's general anxiety. Everybody around me is getting this anxiety and they're taking this pill. And I'm like, that's not good enough. I can't just take a pill. Like, I know Buddhist teachings are right. I know they are. I'm just misinterpreting them. And so I'm trying to, change my vessel. I'm not trying to be a stinky vessel anymore. And I'm trying to be, not a leaky vessel either, but it's very hard. So, I mean, I'm just, first off, thank you for bringing up that general anxiety, because now I'm like, I go into work and I'm like, this is where the anxiety is coming from. Like the body feels it. I start, my chest gets tight and I'm like, no, like calm down. Like everything's going to be okay. Like the lights will change in accordance. The car's not going to fall apart. People aren't going to smash into me, so trying to get through all of that. So thank you for bringing that up. And, too, it's so tricky. Like, how do you judge the Buddha's teachings knowing that our mind is faulty anyways?
Oh, well, now see, now that last question you asked, that's a doozy of a question. Let me see if I can speak a little bit to the rest of what you said first. First of all, I so appreciate how thoughtful you're being with all of that. It's really amazing. And I hope it's none of my business in a way, but I hope you're not being hard on yourself with any of this. Like, but I mean, but then again, you're a human being and you're a Western, so probably you are.
And, again, the YouTube and Lama Yeshi, like, I know it's all algorithms with the YouTube stuff, but they pull up these videos that are so pertinent to what I'm dealing with, and especially like, your teaching, and then Lama Yeshi, when he's like, you need to make it personal. Like, this is probably why you're not, accomplishing anything, because you need to make it personal. And therein lies another question, like, how do I make it personal from a Buddhist standpoint? Yeah, I have so many questions, but yeah.
No, these are all very good questions. Well, let me start by saying this. First of all, think back to what I said about the two children crossing the street, right? So one thing I can kind of probably already tell you right now is that you probably don't need right now to focus on the teachings about the certainty of death, right? They're there, they'll be there when you need them. Don't worry about that, right? So that's the easy thing that I can say. Another thing that I'll say, which it's still not getting at the heart of your question yet, but I think there's a lot of it's applying that same principle to the vessels thing, like to, in terms of like, here's the teaching about the vessels, but even there, it's like, am I the child who's too afraid to cross the street and so forth? So across the board, we want to think about it that way. And so one thought is, I think it's very wise, like we said, to say, well, if something isn't working for me, then probably there's a fault in the vessel. If I've already come to a point where I really have trust that this stuff is generally helpful. And I would also suggest that we probably don't need to over focus on it. If we're doing our best, we're doing enough, so and maybe this is totally irrelevant to you, I don't know, but I think this is a helpful and important thing anyway. It's, if we find like, oh, I'm trying and this isn't working, what am I doing wrong, like, relax a little bit, stop focusing on this one so much, like, it's okay, like, I'm suffering enough, I don't need to be kicking myself or blaming myself or trying to, of course we can troubleshoot, of course, but you don't need to say like, oh, that damn vessel. Again, I'm not saying you're doing that, but it's just another thought too. In terms of the anxiety itself, I have two thoughts. One thought is, what among the teachings of the Buddha might help with that? But I'll tell you the other thought first. And for the other thought, I need to give a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that, as I said, I am a Western psychologist by trade, right? And so I am biased. And so one of my biases is that this is something that I've thought about for many years, and I expect I'm still going to think about for many years to come. Who knows? Hopefully, one day I'll come to a wisdom of investigation about it, but I haven't yet. But it's what's the place of like Western psychology in terms of helping us with our suffering vis-a-vis Buddhism, right? Like, how can I be a Western psychologist by day and a Buddhist by night? You know, like somebody's going to find my secret identity, my alter ego in there somewhere. But here's what I currently think. What I currently think is that the Dharma is giving us these tools to dismantle suffering from the root, right? The Dharma isn't just helping us with anxiety about COVID, with fear of flying, with, you know, the Dharma is helping us overcome the suffering, of which those things are tiny little corner, plus the suffering of change, plus all pervasive condition suffering. We're talking about undoing the whole bit. And that is going to take a while, right? To do that. On the other hand, Western psychology is absolutely not claiming that it can do that at all. All that it's claiming that it can do is help relieve certain symptoms, right? And bear with me, because I think you'll see where I'm going with this in a little bit, right? It's a roundabout way of getting there, but Western psychology, by relying on the scientific method, has in fact developed some very powerful tools for helping address certain symptoms. From a Buddhist point of view, we would say temporarily, for one lifetime, maybe, you know, which from a Buddhist point of view is very temporarily. So, and it does that a lot faster. So in other words, we have one system that will get rid of anxiety, you know, about this and that, and as well as every other suffering in a long time. And we have another system that will get rid of just this tiny little piece of it quickly, but everything else will still be there. And so my current stance is that I think each of them has a place. So if we're suffering very acutely, then personally, I think that turning to some of the more, perhaps we could even say superficial methods of Western psychology can be very helpful in giving us some faster relief, and therefore also giving us more mental space to continue practicing the Dharma. And they're not mutually exclusive. It's not like they're saying contradictory things. They're just talking about different things. You know, it's, to use another analogy, it's almost as if the Buddha Dharma is like quantum mechanics, and Western psychology is like how to fix the engine of your car. You know, like if you master quantum mechanics, you'll master the universe, and therefore the engine of your car will come along with it. You know, but you'll get there. Like if you need the car to go tomorrow, read a book on car mechanics rather than quantum mechanics, right? So having said all of that, if you find that you're experiencing a tremendous amount of anxiety, it's of course completely up to you, but it might be helpful to talk to somebody who's trained in empirical methods for treating that. So like no offense to anybody, but like not a psychoanalyst or something like that, who will also take a few eons to get somewhere, but like something like cognitive behavior therapy or something like that, where there can be a combination of very powerful physical relaxation techniques together with very like specific, concrete, like ways of like checking certain thoughts, as well as certain behaviors that you can do that can help decrease that anxiety. As a psychologist, I've seen that help people very fast and very powerfully. So I feel like as a Buddhist, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. Like, in other words, if I happen to know something that I think can help people, as a Buddhist, I would be remiss not to mention that. So that's long story to say that much. Now, having said that, from within just Buddhism itself, within just the spectrum of Buddha Dharma, I think the types of teachings that might help with that type of anxiety might be teachings. Let me just think for a second, because some of these, again, they might kind of go too far in the other direction. The ultimate one will be meditating on selflessness, on the emptiness of inherent existence. You know, the fear that I'll be hurt, let's say, is necessarily based on a very concrete, tight sense of an I that can be hurt and threats that can happen, you know, and so on. And if we can truly meditate on that and see through that, then that fear, it will absolutely, completely disappear and never return again, because it can't, you know. And again, that will be much more powerful and lasting than anything you can get from Western psychology, to be totally honest. And it will take more than a few weeks to get there, you know. Aside from that, I think some mindfulness techniques of just practicing bringing the mind to the here and now, you know, instead of, like, sometimes if I'm worried about getting sick, like my mind is already in the hospital, in the ICU, you know, but I'm not yet. So kind of saying, all right, maybe that's out there, maybe that's coming, maybe not, I don't know, whatever, but where am I now? You know, where am I here? Where am I now? Bringing the awareness to the sensations in the body and not evaluating the sensations, not assessing them as like good, bad, painful, and no, just like what am I feeling where? Like, what does it feel like? Let me rest my attention there. That can help too sometimes. And then a very, very, very powerful thing that can help tremendously if you're able to do it, and it can be very hard, meaning it can take a lot of practice, but it's the teachings on Lojong, on transforming the mind. Especially Lama Zopa Rinpoche has this amazing book, the best book I've ever read, period, called Transforming Problems into Happiness. And it's a pretty advanced practice, but it uses the power of our suffering that we're experiencing to switch that into happiness. And one way to do that, and again, this is very advanced, but one way to do that is to think like this. This is assuming that you really believe in all the Buddhist tenets already. But if so, then you can think like this. All right, all of these people are suffering tremendously. So many of them are suffering exactly the same way as I am. Others are suffering the same way, but more intensely. Others are suffering in different, but there's just this whole horrible suffering all around me. If I become enlightened, the faster I become enlightened, the faster I can take that away from everybody. What's stopping me from becoming enlightened right now? There's a lot of negative karma. A lot of the karma for suffering is there. So between me and enlightenment, there's all of this negative karma. Therefore, I need to get rid of this negative karma for me to become enlightened, for the sake of everybody. Whenever I experience suffering, I am burning up negative karma. Therefore, whenever I experience suffering, I'm coming closer to helping all beings, right? To remove ours. Therefore, this isn't a trick, by the way. Like if you've established each of these tenets and you really think that's true, this literally is mathematically follows that. Therefore, the more I'm suffering now, the less all beings will have to suffer. Because the more I'm suffering now, the more negative karma I'm burning up, the faster I'm going to become enlightened. The faster I become enlightened, the faster I can take away the suffering, the less all beings will have to suffer. And so if you can, this is a very advanced bodhicitta practice, but if you can say, thank goodness I'm feeling so horrible. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Just not to react though, right? Because if you react to the suffering, then you're just imprinting more upon your mental continuum to experience that
What
again.
do I react?
Like if I'm, so tomorrow when I go into work, if I just sit with the panic and anxiety, I could just be like, yes, I'm purifying karma. I can practice the Tonglen, like, may all anxiety ripen upon me. May I be the only one in the world experiencing anxiety right now. Then that just purifies it and brings me one step closer to my ultimate goal.
It's a
But
huge.
if I go ahead and react and I'm like, F you, get out of my way. Like, why are they calling me into the work? This is stupid.
Yes, exactly.
If I feed into that anxiety and I push everybody away, then that's going to set that imprint, and I'm going to set myself up for more actual reasons to experience the anxiety.
That's exactly right. The only thing I would add is remember to validate all of that too, though. Remember to be kind with yourself and to say, but of course, I'm feeling angry. Of course, I want to tell everybody to go F themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, if
It's
I
not the
feel that
Buddhist
way,
way.
if I didn't feel that way, Buddha wouldn't need to have discovered Buddhism. I'd be enlightened already, you know? Like, we need Buddhism because we feel that way. So that's what we expect. That's there. Of course, that's there. No problem. And I'm just going to choose to not act on that because I don't want the outcome that comes from acting on that. You know, I'm going to choose instead to try, you know, talk about David and Goliath. Like, it's a heroic thing to try. I'm going to try to see if I can rejoice even a little bit that I get to experience this so that everybody doesn't have to. If you can do that, if you can even think to try, forget trying. If you can think to try, I bow to you, really. I'm so sorry. I know we're over time, so I know we need to stop. Thank you so much for those questions. They're so important. And yeah, and so let's end by dedicating the positive potential. We said that positive potential is one of the 4 things we need to be able to have realizations. And so we've created positive potential, like we've created potential because in every moment we're creating potential. It's positive in as much as it's relating to the Dharma, and so it's going to bring us back to the Dharma somehow, and the Dharma is what will ultimately bring us to our goals. So we think all of this positive potential that we created, may it move us forward, may it move us in the directions only of peace, happiness, bliss, compassion, loving kindness, and wisdom, clarity, skill, and means. So that all of those are all means to an end, and the end is that we may bring all beings to perfect enlightenment, to perfect happiness and perfect enlightenment. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. I hope everybody has a good week, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys same time next week for, I think, the final one of these, right? Yeah. So thank you all so much. Looking forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.